Namaskar. Today we will be discussing nature and scope of Indian philosophy. The nature and scope of Indian philosophy also requires that we do understand what we mean by Indian philosophy. So first, I will be discussing the meaning of Indian philosophy and then the nature and scope of Indian philosophy. By the term Indian philosophy is understood thoughts born in India, especially thoughts up till AD 1000 or a little after, till when Indian thoughts did not yet become linked with thoughts from outside. Chronologically, Indian philosophy can be broadly carved up into four broad divisions. First, the Vedic period. Second, the Epic period. Third, the Sutra period. And fourth, the Scholastic period. First, Vedic period. This period is signified by thoughts of the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. The views put forward during these stages are not philosophical in the technical sense of the term. However, to understand the philosophical systems that developed later, it is necessary to study and understand the views expressed in the Samhitas and the Upanishads. By Samhitas, we understand the collection of hymns, prayers, magic songs, benedictory words, sacrificial formulas, and litanies. They are addressed to different gods. For any adequate account of Indian thought, the study of Samhitas is indispensable. They can be said to be the first efforts of Indian mind to comprehend and express the mystery of the world. Then we have the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas are the ritual textbooks which are intended to guide the priest through the complicated details of sacrificial rites. They can be described as texts that deal with science of sacrifice. Next are the Aranyakas. Aranyakas contain reflections of man who belong to the third stage of ashrama life, known as Vanaprastha, and they form the transition stage to the Upanishads. The last in the Vedic period are the Upanishads. They form the concluding portions of the Veda and are therefore called the Veda Anta, or the end of the Veda. The denomination actually suggests that they contain the essence of Vedic teachings. The Upanishads contain mature philosophical ideas, though they are not yet expounded as systems of philosophy. However, they form the foundations on which most of the later philosophies of India rest. Next, we come to the epic period. The epic period extends over the development of thoughts between early Upanishads and the darshanas, or systems of philosophy. India have the two epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata. They serve as the vehicles through which was conveyed the new message of what may be termed as ethico-religious living. The epics are not systems of philosophy, but rather are presentations of different ways of life and their philosophies, with concrete examples, anecdotes, fables, parables, etc. The epic period was also the age of the Buddha and the Mahavira, in which individuals began to reflect independently of the Veda on the nature of reality, ethics, and meaning of life. It was in the hands of Vardhamana that Jainism took a definite form. Up to the time of Vardhamana, his forerunners were called bookless, nigranthas. Jainism does not accept reality of God, but only of gods, and they are treated as inferior to its religious teachers. The teachers are called Tirthankaras, men who make their abode a holy place. There are said to be 24 teachers in Jainism, and Vardhamana is the 24th. Jainas call Vardhamana by the title Jina, the conqueror, because he conquered his self, his desires, drives, and dualities like love and hate. He is called Mahavira, the great hero, as he was a hero in mortal battlefield. One may call Jainism as a philosophy of self-control. Gautama is the founder of Buddhism. He is called the Buddha, the enlightened. He did not write any book, but taught his doctrines orally. The result of his enlightenment was set forth by him in the form of what has come to be known as Four Noble Truths. The history of Buddhist thought is a history of philosophy that grew out of the Buddha's ethico-religious teachings. Every school that calls itself as Buddhist must refer to the Buddha's original teachings as its basis. In the epic period, there were other thinkers besides the Buddha and Mahavira who thought independently of the Veda and flourished during this time. However, information about these thinkers is not directly available. Some of the views of such thinkers got preserved in Jaina and Buddhist literature. First, there were the thinkers who could not accept the doctrine of ethical action. They were called Akarmavadins or moralists. Second, there were the thinkers who thought that soul attained salvation through intense indulgence of the senses. Third, there were the agnostics and skeptics, of whom Sanjaya is the most well known. Fourth, there were materialists like Ajita and Payasi. Fifth, there were eternalists like Kakuda and Purana Kassapa. They maintained that all that is a being, and there being no destruction of being, being is eternal. Sixth, there were annihilationists who maintained that nothing is permanent and everything will be annihilated. Seventh, there were the Ekavadins, the monist. Eighth, there were the Anekavadins, the pluralist. Some other independent speculations that developed during epic period are mentioned in the Svetashvatara Upanishad, a later Upanishad that probably belonged to the 6th century BC. Out of all these, the Charvaka, the Nyaya, the Vaisheshika, the Sankhya, and the Yoga developed later into independent and full-fledged schools. Those that could not develop either disappeared or were absorbed by others. The third is the Sutra period. In India, the first systematization of thoughts appeared in the form of sutras, aphorisms, which are short, pithy, incomplete sentences. In an age when there were no written books, such sentences were easy ways for memorizing the doctrines. Vedanta Sutras were composed by Vadarayana in 5th century BC. These sutras were composed for the purpose to discuss the nature of Brahman. Thus, they are also called Brahma Sutras. Mimamsa Sutras were composed by Jaimini. The movement to compose this aphoristic philosophical literature must have begun around 4th century BC. Vaisheshika Sutras were composed by Konada, perhaps in 6th or 5th century BC. Sankhya Sutras were composed by Kapila, perhaps in 6th century BC. Yoga Sutras were composed by Patanjali, perhaps in 3rd century BC. They were recomposed by Vikyana Bhikshu in 15th century AD. The Jaina aphorisms were done by Umaswati in Tattva Artha Adhigama Sutras in 3rd century AD. The composition of Buddhist sutras started about 5th century BC. The Prajnaparamitas, the sutras of Mahayana Buddhism, began in 1st century BC. As the sutras were incomplete sentences, they were difficult to understand. So, commentaries in the form of explanations began to be written from about 5th or 6th century AD. While explaining the sutras, the commentators began to introduce their own views. Thus, it is during this period that various schools of philosophy in India got formed. It is to this period that names like Kumarila, Shankara, Bhaskara, Jayanta, Sridhara, Udayana, Vasachpati, Ramanuja, Madhva, Vigyana Bhikshu, and the Raghunatha, who are commentators on sutras, belong. Differences of view among the followers of the same school also began to make their appearances during this period. Commentators like Shankara and Ramanuja restated the old doctrine, and their restatement is just as valuable as spiritual discovery. Next comes the scholastic period. To this period belongs independent treatises apart from commentaries. This period also sees composition of treatises on various available systems of thought. The most popular account of various systems of Indian philosophy is the Sarva Darshana Sangraha by Madhavacharya. The Sarva Siddhanta Sangraha assigned to Shankara and Prasthana Bheda by Madhusudana Saraswati also contain useful accounts of different philosophies. Next, we will be discussing the nature and scope of Indian philosophy.